Well, and we even talked a little bit about challenge not even being external, but also internal. So, like the amount of athletes that I have to talk to, not have to, that I get to talk to about, they're just too stressed and they're too anxious. So, when in reality they're fantastic athletes, they can meet the challenges that's in front of them. It's just the challenge that's laid out in their brains. And so, a lot of my job isn't really a whole lot of like, okay, let's get your skill up. It's a lot of let's bring that challenge in your brain that you're expecting this to be down so that you're not at such a high anxiety arousal. Some responsibility does fall onto the individual athlete of, okay, if this is too easy and you're bored in your drills just to get through the day or get through practice, you got to start introducing new challenge. You have, like, as the athlete, have to do that yourself. You're listening to Mentor Moments, where we talk about all things counseling, technology, education, and career development. I am Braden Wooters, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Michael Keener. Grab a seat, and let's get started. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Mentor Moments. My name is...
I'm talking over you. I'm just so excited to get started. Braden, go right ahead.
And I hit record. What were you going to tell me?
Well, I sent you an email 2 days ago about therapy speak. Have you heard of that? Because you're hip and young.
So, I mean, I'm big on that. I haven't had the chance to read it just because I've been so busy with work, but I literally opened up the email as I was pulling this stuff up. So tell me what your thoughts are on this.
Well, it was more of my student after I say, hey, do you want to be on our, we're writing this and sending it to ACA. And it's just a short little like blog type piece. And I said, well, let's do, I do a co-host a podcast with a former student and whatnot. So she, followed us and looked at it, and she was giggling because it was the 6-7 episode that she saw. Oh.
No. How does that lead into therapy speak?
It does. And she just, like, I told her about it. She looked at it. And then in class later that day, she just laughed that, that we were talking about 6-7 or me trying to be young and hip and talk about therapy speak. Because I'm not TikTok. So I didn't really, this term was relatively new to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you and I can definitely spend an entire episode talking about it, but what it's typically I found that follows that is therapy speak and like weaponizing it, utilizing it in a way that's inappropriate. And a lot of it at the end of the day, it all stems from the mystification of therapy, whereas like if I use this term, then I'm somehow smarter than the people around me because nobody really knows what it actually means. Yes, you and I could spend hours, I think, talking about that.
Cool. All right. Should we break and then restart?
Yes. Okay. Any updates on your end? Anything before I start yapping about?
No, let's just, I did a little chat GPT conversation about flow, awe, and novelty. So I'm ready to go.
You're primed. You're ready. So at the time of this recording, I did my first workshop with our athletes here at Lindenwood in a while. I did a workshop last semester, but this semester my goal is to do a workshop once a month. This month was about flow and how to introduce flow. It's a concept and it's a topic that you and I have talked about a lot on this episode, but I wanted to make sure that I chatted about it here first. But before I get into flow and what the workshop was like, I need to rant. When did I become old is my first question, I suppose, because I used to think that I was really good with technology and that I knew what I was doing. And then you plug in your computer, you show up to present. I'm sorry, I'm going to go on a rant. You show up with your computer. You've created the PowerPoint. You know exactly what you're going to present. You plug it into the HDMI cord. All right. Well, then it takes a little bit and then it's on a TV, but then you don't know, but then it's showing an extension of your desktop. It's not showing a reflection of it. So then you've got to figure out, okay, do I drag the stuff left or right? And then after you do that, then you hit presenter mode. Well, then it's showing your notes to everybody. Well, no, I don't want them to see my notes. I just want them to see the slides. I want to see the notes. So then you're spending another 5 minutes trying to show them the right thing. And then don't even get me started on if there's a video involved in a presentation. Don't even try that, because then if there's a video, and especially if that video has audio, well, is the audio. You'll hit play and you won't hear any audio, and then you're like, well, you crank up the volume on your computer, and that's not working. So then you got to go into settings to find out where the volume's at, and then once you figure out that it is supposed to come from the TV, then you look for the remote control for the TV. But for some reason, every single classroom or presentation room seems to have like three different remotes, and you don't know which remote goes to which. And so I'm pressing like seven different remotes to try to get the. Anyway, it was one of those moments that made me feel incredibly old. I've always thrived and felt, I don't know, relevant, that I could be the one, be like, oh, yes, here's how you operate a television. Here's how you operate a smart board or like a projector. But this was one of those moments during my workshop that I freaked out. I didn't like freak out, but I was so stressed, so upset, and in the nicest way ever, it made me think of you. I mean that nicely,
Let me get my cane out. And well, it
but
does make me think of when you came over to the office and we were first connecting to Riverside.
yeah.
And I was like a little bit behind. But otherwise, I feel like but I can empathize with that presentation. Yeah, I know, like, because I have two screens, and then sometimes it's how, like, I know somebody tried to help me one time in the settings and set up, like, my screens got flipped too, like you're saying, and just like, are you mirroring and all? Yeah. So I can empathize with
Well,
that.
and also your work computer too. So it's like, well, there's stuff that I don't want them to see, obviously. So like that's even more stressful. They'll them to see my teams. I don't want them to see my work. So anyway,
And
I had a
now,
good.
well, I always bring speakers with me too, just in case, that I external speakers versus just, thinking.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, it's impossible, and I wish that there was like a more foolproof, seamless way of doing it. But anyway, had about 30 some athletes there. It's one workshops are pretty, relaxed, and it's up to the athletes on if they want to show up. So it's kind of a toss up on how many you're going to end up getting, and from what sports you're going to end up getting, just because of seasons and what time of year is. I ended up with pretty much the entire men's hockey team. We have a pretty good relationship with the coach there where he really emphasizes mental health. And if there's any kind of like opportunity that his players can come to, he really pushes it. The coaching staff really push
That's
for
awesome.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super great. I had some Olympic weightlifters, I had a couple track people, so it was a good mix of people. But yeah, we talked all about flow, and it was cool. It was one of those really great experiences where I could yap and talk about things that you and I have already talked about. Where I was talking and I was like, we've covered these things before. We chatted about those things that make up flow. So concentration, obviously, like a high form of focus. We chatted a lot about control, so understanding body control, understanding what is in your control and what's not in your control, not kind of going all over the place with what you think is going to stress you out. Time dilation or time distortion, that was another thing that we chatted about. I've even chatted about it in session or in episodes before, where I'm talking about sessions that go by really really quickly, and I'm like, oh my gosh, a whole hour has passed. And then finally, like loss of self-consciousness or like loss of doubt. I feel like that kind of goes a little bit into control, but it is like you're not even really thinking or anything like that. So we chat a lot about those four things, about how that kind of makes up flow, how flow seems to not really be a switch that we turn off and on, how it is kind of something that gets manifested through our experiences. Like there are ways to get primed for it, which is something that we talked about in our workshop, but it's something that we were really kind of discussing it. I'm going to pause because I'm yapping a lot, but am I missing anything so far? I feel like
Well,
I'm hitting.
no, I think you have the characteristics. What I would add too, as a condition to get into that flow
Mhm.
state, is that optimal zone of, it's not too hard or too easy for you from that athletic. If it's too hard, you get discouraged; too easy, you get bored. So you don't sort of get into that flow
Absolutely.
state. So finding that, I guess, sweet spot, so you can then, like you
Mhm.
said, go to
And
complete
that is
concentration and loss of time, or that, and the loss of self consciousness.
Yeah, and that is what we talked about. Again, so like after we were able to like really define it, then we talked about those conditions, which was exactly what you said, that kind of like challenge versus skill balance. And talking more about like, okay, so we can understand the concept, like we can look at all the graphs that show you window of tolerance and things like that. But then what do you do with it? And so we chatted a little bit more about, well, I mean, there's a difference between doing it in practice and doing it in competition. Coaches have this really difficult task, I think, of trying to get their players into flow or provide enough arousal without, stressing their players out too much. Something that, I mean, and I know, and especially in athletics, is that everyone's arousal level is different. Everyone's window of tolerance is different. So what's going to be really hard for somebody is not going to be very thrilling and might be even boring to another athlete that you have on your team. So preventing or like presenting drills that able to help people go into flow for everybody, for your entire team, very difficult. So we did talk about how, well, it does, some responsibility does fall onto the individual athlete of, okay, if this is too easy and you're bored in your drills just to get through the day or get through practice, you got to start introducing new challenge. You have, like, as the athlete, have to do that yourself. Practices, and I'm saying things that are very duh, but are good things to remind us, is that, in practice, we have a little bit more control over challenge, where in competition, the only thing we have control over is skill. And I hated, I wish that there was a better way that I could have presented the idea to the athletes other than like, get good. like just get your game up, but measuring, like, managing your ability of skill allows freedom to move about that graph of entering into flow a little bit easier, I suppose. So we did chat about that quite a lot. I'm going to pause. Am I touching on anything?
Well, to me, there's two things, and they both relate around practice. So, like, I like, practice perfect. We say practice makes perfect. Well, practice makes permanent. So you got to be practicing the right things.
Hmm.
And so going to what you were saying, not just building skill, well, it's how are you building technique in to get to that skill, and how are you coming to practice with a purpose? Today I want to work on X, Y, and Z. Or if the student athlete doesn't have that control over that, does the coach set out that plan so they know, is this a high intense day? Is it the day before a competition? So it's more drill, like, so they can know, or you can be self-reflective about it. Maryville, we brought in Mike Haggerty, who is a college wrestler, high school coach, a college coach. He coached at the Olympic Training Center. He's coached
Hmm.
national champions and world team members. But anyways, he talks about a time where, with one of his first years coaching, he tried to do a visualization, and he never did that before. And he did it like, turned off the lights in the wrestling room, and he's talking about, then he turned on the lights and everybody fell asleep because he had never practiced it before. So, like, this idea of sort of like visualizing, which is a sound technique, you
Hmm.
just can't do it the day of the match to think. So, like, again, if we want to try to better work to get into flow state, there's these things that we can, again, obviously practice or have to be
Hmm.
aware of.
Well, and we even talked a little bit about challenge not even being external, but also internal. So, like, the amount of athletes that I have to talk to, not have to, that I get to talk to about, they're just too stressed and they're too anxious. So, when in reality they're fantastic athletes, they can meet the challenges that's in front of them. It's just the challenge that's laid out in their brains. And so, a lot of my job isn't really a whole lot of like, okay, let's get your skill up. It's a lot of, let's bring that challenge in your brain that you're expecting this to be down so that you're not at such a high anxiety arousal.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, how do we normalize that and get them to realize, you've been playing the sport all your life. You've put on, these skates before. It's just another competition. And again, just
Exactly.
our breathing techniques too. Well, how can we, you know,
It is that kind of, and my boss and I, Becky, were chatting about this. It is that kind of cohesion, collaboration between coaching staff and us, which is, I think, a lot of our job here on the therapy side is getting, making competitions less stressful in your brain. So trying to make competition feel more like practice, where, okay, let's, even though the stakes are probably higher, you are typically less stressed out in practice. Let's try to implement those kinds of like thought processes. Don't be flippant, don't be, careless, but also, if you're performing better in practice, it's probably because you're less stressed. So, how do we introduce that? But then there's also responsibility on the coach's aspect, which is, how do we get this as close to game competition as possible? So, getting it really loud, turning on all the lights, getting this as close to an actual competition as possible so that we're used to that. It is that kind of balance piece. Talk about goals. Goals was a big thing, and last time you and I talked about this, I was telling you about the goal, like, example that we were giving about, providing different challenges, and so I had them all do, how can we interflow just standing? That was kind of our whole thing, and so Standing's too easy. Then what do we need to do? Okay, let's look at our goal. We need to make it more attainable, more challenging. And handstand. Okay, no, it's probably too challenging. We're going to enter anxiety. Okay, well, what's something that's a good in the middle? Probably standing on one foot. Essentially, we were doing a sobriety test in there for a good minute or so. Afterwards, what we started talking about were these themes of autonomy, which is that it's so much easier to interflow when it's by your choice. Now, coaches can, I don't know, maybe like get the ball rolling, but at the end of the day, it's so much easier for me to enter into flow whenever I have the autonomy and freedom to kind of do it myself, as opposed to it's a homework task or it's something that is being forced upon me. So we did talk about that, about how autonomy is so much easier. It makes it so much easier to enter flow. I'm going to pause for a minute and take a drink of water because I'm talking so fast.
Well, I guess I just think usually now when my days of being an elite athlete are over, right?
What?
What? You reminded me that I was old earlier today.
No.
But it's when I'm, woodworking is usually when I talk about it, right? And so when you talk about motivation, like woodworking as a hobby versus me woodworking for, a side hustle or something. And so there is this, again, it's the intrinsic there. And to me, going back to that zone of skill, when I get into it, I most notice it when I'm really thinking about, okay, this is what I want to make. How do I make it with the tools that I have and in the order that I need to cut things. And so I'm so engrossed in that. So that skill level is sort of, again, in that zone. And I do lose, like, I have no sense of really time. I'm not happy. I'm not sad. I'm just doing it. And then when I know that in the zone is when it all comes together. And then I sort of laugh to myself a little bit. I go, ha ha, like I got it. Like I figured it out. It fits together. I didn't screw it up. Right. So, and that sort of pops me out where then I get sort of that high or that feeling. And what also makes me recognize is that when I used to go and visit my dad at his shop and he was working on something, he would laugh like that too when he finished something. So to me, that there's that, I don't know. I know that extra emotional piece.
Well, you're touching on big themes that we talked about. I mean, at the end of the day, is really all we're talking about the emotional pieces to flow, which is, the meaning behind what you're doing. So if you're doing something that feels pretty meaningless, like doesn't like fit into, I don't know, what you feel like might be a broader purpose, and it's not fitting into maybe a larger goal. So a lot of these athletes, I mean, like their sport is a stepping stone to maybe what they want to do for their career, or it's a stepping stone to becoming a better just overall person. And so this is where we touch on those ideas of novelty and being, making it bigger than yourself is what we talked about. And so whenever you're talking about, having that emotional piece and connection to like previous memories and making it almost more of like a generational thing, that's what a lot of it is. I mean, a lot of for our athletes, where I mean, some of them are, first generation college students. So it is, and to be in a sport and to be out of the country. So it is so much deeper and getting in touch more with that. I think that the best example that I give are those days where I'm really burnt out from like therapy. And then I have to kind of remind myself of, okay, well, why did I get in this job to begin with? What were those immediate things? And then pretty soon you're not even tired anymore. Then you're re-energized and you can go back into it. So that's exactly kind of what we were talking about. I also like that you brought up woodworking because the third and kind of final thing that we were talking about was immediate feedback. And you know exactly where I'm going to go with this is a lot of times we get enveloped into a task and we don't know if it's working or not. And as soon as we don't know if it's working or if we're on the right path or if we're on the right track, then we get sidetracked. And then doubt enters our mind. And then we're no longer really too much into it. Then it just opens up the brain to go down a bunch of rabbit holes and then we're out of flow. And so the idea behind it is just like how woodworking, it's so much easier to enter into flow where you have little steps that, okay, I accomplished this step. I'm one step closer to my goal of completing this piece of furniture. The example that I give is my Sudoku books. One number getting a little close to that dopamine hit that, okay, I'm on the right track. This is working per se. And that's why we did that standing thing, the standing example, because there's no better immediate feedback than body feedback. And the best example is balance. Nobody has to come up to you whenever you're woodworking and saying, okay, you completed the second step. And you don't have to do that. You just intrinsically know that, okay, I did it on to the next. You're not getting it from a coach, you're getting it from yourself. And that's anyway. Yeah. I love
I just have another observation, if you don't mind.
I'm ready.
If you thought the technology issue thought you were old, maybe your Sudoku book is really should have been your first indication that you're old.
I'm trying to get on my phone less. That's the whole thing. I was like, how am I going to get on my phone less? What do what do old people do? If I enter my grandpa era, so I bought like a $3 Sudoku book from like Schnucks and carry that bad boy around. I started drinking black coffee now too. I got to just let the geriatric traits continue to come.
Now,
But
don't alienate half our audience now. So,
no, you're right. You're right. I have plenty of athletes that drink coffee, and I'm like, oh wow, you're young drinking black coffee. Anyway, but yeah, so I felt like the content of it was pretty good. Now, of course, we talked about strategies that kind of are barriers to flow or things that kind of knock us out of flow, and like little things that can be helpful whenever we're in flow. Little things like, how do I want to explain this? I don't know. Some of these feel a little cheesy whenever I explain them, but I think that you'll understand kind of where I'm coming from. Like things that take you out of flow, doubt, listening to other people, mistakes, a lot of self doubt. And so we talked about, how the uniform or the equipment that you wear almost makes you a different person. A lot of my clients, even myself, they love Batman. I love Batman. And I'm not saying that my clients are dressing up like Batman, but in a way, when you are on the field, it's important to kind of almost see yourself as somebody else. Where whenever I'm wearing this, I'm not the nervous person that gets nervous in front of other people. I'm not this. I am an athlete because of what I'm wearing. And so it does sound a little bit like, I'm jumping through hoops to kind of cope through this. And it is a pretty powerful, physical representation of aligning ourselves with identity work. And then, a second example that we talked about was like, okay, well, what happens when you do make a mistake? Because you are going to make a mistake, and the amount of clients that I'm working with that, as soon as they make a mistake, their whole game is derailed, and then the flow that they were in, they're out of it. And so, just talking about, what do we do with that? And so, another kind of visualization thing we talked about was like almost treating the mistake like I don't know, like a screaming toddler almost, like because it's annoying and nobody likes to be around it. And it's kind of embarrassing to be kind of around it because now everyone's staring and everyone's looking. You're in the supermarket and this kid's crying. You know what I'm talking about. And so almost like putting it away for later. Whereas like, well, I can't reprimand this kid for yelling right now in the middle of the schnooks. So I mean I could, but it wouldn't look good on either of us if I yelled at the kid. So almost like we're gonna focus on that and return to it whenever we're back home. And it's that kind of thought process, which is, okay, I can't do anything with this mistake that I just made. I'm too busy playing my sport in the middle of competition. I'm gonna return to this and give it the attention that it deserves, whether bad or good attention. Once I'm out of here, once I have the game film in front of me, once I'm able to go through it with another person, and thinking of it like parking lot, like, okay, I'm gonna put you in the parking lot. We're going to come back to you whenever, we're done with this thing in front of us. And just kind of a visualization piece. It doesn't even have to be the parking lot, like maybe the sideline. Maybe, okay, like in your brain, I've put that mistake on the bench on this specific chair, and I'll return to it when this is over. But those were a couple examples that we talked about. Of course, there's only so much I can fit into like 45 minutes. But yeah, it was fun. Clearly, with how fast I'm talking, I'm very passionate about this. But yeah, it was I don't know. I don't know if any of that resonated, or I mean, I'm sure that you've heard a lot of those things, but yeah.
well, I mean, no, I mean, yes, it resonates. Everybody sort of knows that I hang out, again, with the wrestlers. So that's something that it's common that, especially I think for like one-on-one sports when errors are so much magnified because it's just you out there versus, maybe if you're on a football line, you can sort of
Hmm.
hide a little bit unless you specifically get flagged and they call your number. But again, there's that difference there. You either win or learn, like you said, so how do you reframe
Hmm.
that? Control against, it's amazing how many cliches there are, but they actually have sound meaning, like control what you can control. At the wrestling team, we talk a lot about being optimal. Like everybody says, like, this was off or this was, well, nothing's going to be perfect. So how do you learn to shoot for excellence or optimal when that in that moment comes? You might in the first 15 seconds, you might turn your ankle. Well, are you gonna? not not compete, or you have to sort of figure
Right.
out a way. So again, how do we just um, as you said, sort of contain the negative,
Mhm.
or use the the baseball analogy for the pitchers that give up a home run. You just got to be, you know, every pitch is a new pitch, and you forget that memory, that type of thing.
Yeah, and you hear those things like have the memory of a goldfish, which is like, okay, but I'm not a goldfish, so like, how can I do that? So it's things like that's difficult. I will say the only thing that I think I'll add, and then I think we can wrap up is it's been a while since I've done public speaking. I mean, I've done it before, like in my previous roles and stuff like that, but it was in those moments that I realized, like, oh, it's been a while since I've done this, and I like to think that I like am inherently good at it, but there was one of those moments where I was like, I'm rusty at this. Like this is like, while I think I inherently have the skills, it was like, oh, practice actually is important with this. And so there were moments where I definitely, I mean, with the internet or with the technology where I got overwhelmed or mixed up my words and stuff like that. But it was one of those moments of like, "Ah, it's going to be good to get back into practice on this because boy, did I feel rusty. I don't know if you get those feelings like at this point in the game or.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've had a number of conversations recently about how nervous people get when they have to speak in front of public speaking,
Mhm,
speak in front of a group, and how I take that for granted now that, like, it's it's not hard, it's easy, but still remembering. But what I like, what I notice sometimes is sometimes I over prepare,
mhm.
and then maybe the day of, I think, "Oh, I don't have to repair one more time or reflect," and then that's, "Oh, I should have," so that's where I need to sort of, it's not necessarily in public speaking, it's making sure I'm not, again, over preparing, and then just taking something for granted, make sure that I.
I feel the same way because I'll spend like 20 I'll spend like days and days and days on a PowerPoint, and then I'll think like I've been working on this PowerPoint for like a really long time. Surely I know it front to back by now. Like I don't really need to practice it. Like I've been spending last like I know what slide comes next, and then whenever I present, I'm like, "Oh, I should have practiced," because even though I spent like hours looking at this, I just one run through could have fixed a lot of this stuff. It was just a good reminder of those skills that I haven't had to stretch in a while. But yeah, my next workshop is going to be on mental toughness. That's going to be the next topic because I just think, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the definition because there is a legitimate definition, like clinical definition of mental toughness and what goes into it. But that definition is just so broad, and the definition of it is often like really, really, or the mental toughness is more of a behavior or that you can and where mental toughness comes in, like, are you mentally tough only in the sports realm, or can you be mentally tough like in relationships and stuff like that? So we're kind of, and then of course, like, how do you even practice that? Like are there actual like exercise? Do I take a cold shower to get mentally tough? Like, what does that actually? So I'm excited about that. That's what we're doing
Well,
for March.
I'm excited to hear how that comes out.
Me too. Me too. Okay, that's my yapping. Any other thoughts, feelings before we wrap up this episode?
No, I'm interested to see what all our fans have to think about flow, how they experience it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.